If you awoke inside the stone walls of the Tower of London, you would not know whether you were destined for mercy or for a slow and deliberate ruin. Tonight, we step into the footsteps of those who vanished behind its gates. You will discover what life truly felt like for prisoners held inside this fortress of fear, their daily struggles, the echoes of torture, and the silent machinery of royal authority that decided their fate. This is not legend. This is what your life would be if you were taken to the Tower. The Tower of London rose in the late 11th century as a Norman fortress, but across the centuries it transformed into a royal residence, an armory, a treasury, and finally, the most feared prison in England. Here, innocence and guilt were often irrelevant. What mattered was the Crown's suspicion. For a prisoner, this place was a world unto itself, cold, echoing, absolute, where time slowed and fear sharpened every sound. Your imprisonment began the moment the boat scraped against the stone arch known as Traitors Gate. Built under the rule of King Henry III, this water entrance was designed so that high-profile captives, from nobles to queens, could be brought into the fortress unseen by the public. You stepped directly from the Thames into darkness. Guards in heavy wool and iron escorted you through a damp corridor where torchlight flickered off sweating walls. The process was deliberate, theatrical. The Tower was not only a prison, it was a message. By entering through this gate, you were marked as a threat to the realm. Many walked here before you. Queen Anne Boleyn in the early 16th century, or Thomas More earlier that century, each believed they might someday walk back out. Most did not. Once inside, your name was recorded, your possessions confiscated, and your fate surrendered to the lieutenant of the Tower. Your cell could vary drastically depending on your status. A noble might receive a chamber with a small bed, a wooden stool, and a barred window. But a commoner or an enemy the Crown wished to break might be thrown into a stone vault, scarcely lit, with straw that never dried and the stench of the Thames drifting upward. The first night was often the worst. The realization settled slowly. The Tower swallowed people in silence. Every scrape of iron, every drop of water, every distant footstep told you that you were no longer part of the living world. Contrary to popular belief, not every prisoner was tortured, but every prisoner was broken. Interrogations inside the Tower rarely began with violence. They began with pressure, isolation, hunger, cold, and uncertainty. Guards escorted you through narrow spiral staircases to chambers built for intimidation. The questions came slowly, carefully chosen by royal officials who were masters of psychological warfare. They repeated the same words, day after day, wearing down your certainty until you doubted your own memories. The goal was simple: confession through exhaustion. Some, like Guy Fawkes in the early 17th century, resisted at first. But the Tower had time, patience, and methods. If psychological pressure failed, the Tower possessed instruments capable of reshaping the human body and mind. Among them was the infamous rack, located in the Lower Wakefield Tower. You were tied at both ends, wrists at one side, ankles at the other. As the lieutenant or his assistants turned the rollers, your limbs stretched beyond their natural limits. Tendons strained, joints separated. Pain arrived like fire under the skin. Another device, the Scavenger's daughter, folded the body instead of stretching it. Iron bands compressed your knees to your chest and your chest to your thighs. until breathing itself became agony. Only a few recorded victims survived these procedures without permanent damage. Most gave confessions long before the devices reached their full tension. If you escaped torture, daily life still crushed the spirit. Food was unpredictable. A noble prisoner who could afford to pay for meals received bread, ale, and meat cooked in the tower kitchens. A poor captive received little more than stale bread, weak broth, and whatever scraps the guards allowed. Water dripped constantly from stone ceilings. Rats moved beneath the straw. But the worst torment was sound. Iron doors clanged shut. Keys scraped, chains dragged. Hours of silence followed by sudden noise kept your body tense and your sleep shallow. The tower did not need to wound you to break you. It simply waited. If you were housed in the Beauchamp Tower, you shared a space with the ghosts of past prisoners, not in spirit, but in stone. Hundreds of carvings mark its walls. Names, mottos, prayers, symbols of hope or defiance. A former noble captive might have scratched a family crest into the limestone. A doomed conspirator might leave only initials, an attempt to endure longer than their body would. Standing in such a chamber, you felt both comfort and dread. Comfort, because others before you endured. Dread, because so many of them died. These carvings were not art. They were the final voices of people who had nothing left but time and a bare stone wall. You never truly slept. The yeoman warders, known today as the beefeaters, patrolled the corridors with a precision shaped by centuries of royal command. Their boots struck the stones with a slow, unchanging rhythm, a reminder that the tower's authority was absolute. Some guards were indifferent, others were cruel. A few were unexpectedly human and offered a word of comfort, though their kindness never exceeded their orders. Every time a torch passed by your cell door, shadows stretched across the walls like reaching hands. The guards represented more than control. They were a living part of the tower's psychology. Their silence, their presence, and their unwavering obedience kept prisoners in a state of constant watchfulness. Not all executions took place within these walls, but when the crown demanded secrecy or dignity, death was delivered on Tower Green. If your sentence was execution, the days before it unfolded with ceremonial restraint. You might be granted a priest, ink and paper for a final letter, or, if noble, a private farewell with family under guard. The beheading sword or the axe stood ready. The executioner practiced his strike to ensure one clean blow. But history recorded moments of horror, such as the execution of Lady Margaret Pole in the early 16th century, whose death required multiple strokes, each one more brutal than the last. Watching such an event, or merely hearing of it from within your cell, etched fear into your bones. The tower did not simply kill. It reminded everyone that loyalty was life, and disobedience was silence. If the crown wished to send a message, your execution would take place outside the fortress on Tower Hill. There, crowds gathered by the hundreds or even the thousands. They came for witness, for curiosity, or for a grim sense of civic duty. For high-profile prisoners, the walk from the tower gates to the scaffold was a ritual of humiliation. You were accompanied by guards, priests, and officials who read your charges aloud as the people watched. When Thomas Cromwell was executed in the early 16th century, the crowd witnessed not only his fall, but the political weight behind it. a warning carved into the city's memory. If you were a prisoner watching from afar or listening through barred windows, the roar of the crowd felt like a final reminder that the tower's reach extended far beyond its walls. Not every prisoner was destined for death. For some, survival depended on negotiation, money, or the shifting tides of royal politics. A wealthy captive could bribe guards for better food, warmer blankets, or letters smuggled beyond the walls. A noble could petition the king or queen for mercy, though mercy was as rare as sunlight in the lower chambers. Hope often arrived in subtle ways. A guard leaning closer than usual. A whispered rumor that the crown was reconsidering. A delay in your sentence. Sometimes the tower was not a place of ending, but of waiting, suspended between death and the possibility of freedom. A release from the tower was almost ceremonial. The lieutenant informed you, often with little emotion, that the crown had withdrawn its wrath. Your chains were removed. You were led back through halls that had felt eternal. If you were a noble or a political hostage, this release might depend on a treaty, a ransom, or the rise of a more forgiving monarch. Imagine the moment you stepped out of the Byward Tower and felt the air again, cold, open, uncontained. For many survivors, freedom tasted unfamiliar. The tower remained with them in dreams and trembling hands long after they walked away. Some, like Bishop John Fisher in the early 16th century, were imprisoned for months before their fate turned grim. Others, like Sir Walter Raleigh in the early 17th century, were released only to be imprisoned again later. The tower remembered those who left, and often called them back. Every prisoner heard tales of the ravens. Legends claimed that if the ravens ever left the tower, the entire kingdom would fall. Whether you believed the superstition or not, hearing their calls from your cell window created an eerie sense of destiny. These birds fed on scraps, perched on battlements, and watched the prisoners with unsettling calm. For many, the ravens symbolized the tower itself, ancient, watchful, indifferent. Their presence reminded you that fate within these walls did not belong to you. It belonged to history. The Tower of London was never a single thing. It was a palace for some, a fortress for others, a treasury, a torture chamber, and a final resting place for those the crown wished to erase. If you were a prisoner, every stone carried the weight of those who came before you. Every corridor whispered with past footsteps. Every locked door confirmed the truth. The tower was not merely a prison. It was a living institution, shaped by fear, power, and the unspoken agreement that those within it were no longer their own masters. Whether rich or poor, guilty or innocent, you existed in a system older and stronger than any individual will. To imagine yourself inside the Tower of London is to confront the raw machinery of authority. Here, history reveals that punishment is not only the breaking of bodies, but the reshaping of minds through isolation, fear, ritual, and silence. Those who entered its walls walked into a world governed by shadows, whispers, and the cold certainty of royal justice. Some survived, many did not. But each left a fragment of their story carved into stone, echoing through time. And as the final torch fades and the gates close once more, the tower remains, patient, ancient, and forever watching.